Ha ha ha. Thank you, man. I made sure I hit the finish button on the screen this time. You studied the notes. All right, so last week was the big reveal. Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. He told them after these 3 tests that he had put them through who he was. He forgave them. He reassured them that he forgave them. He also reassured them that, hey guys, don't worry. God made all this come together for a very specific reason. And now Joseph wanted to see his father. So remember, he sent his brothers back to Canaan with all these carts, with all these gifts, with all these animals, with all these gold and changes of clothes and all these things. The brothers went back home and said, Dad, you won't believe it, but Joseph is still alive. He's actually like almost all in charge of Egypt, and he wants us to come see him. Jacob didn't believe at first, but once he saw everything and heard all the story from the brothers, he believed it. He agreed to go back to Egypt, and that's where we left off at the end of last week. So we're in Genesis 46. We are going to kind of cruise through some of the last chapters here. Genesis ends in chapter 50. I want to highlight a few specific parts of this story, and we're going to skim over some of the other parts just to bring all this home. But somebody read Genesis 46, the first 7 verses for us, please. All right, so Jacob and the family and everything in tow, they start heading south to Egypt, and they stop in this place called Beersheba, which if you look throughout the Old Testament, this is a pretty popular place. It's mentioned a number of times throughout Scripture. Very specifically, Abraham dug a well there. He had a little bit of a spat with this other guy about land property and who owned what, and so years and years ago, Abraham built a well at this place. So Jacob would have known that. He would have known this is the place where my grandfather dug this well. A few years after that, this is where Isaac wrestled with God, and God said, that promise that I made to Abraham, that your descendants are going to be numerous, that promise now extends to you, Isaac. So that whole thing happened in this area, and God reiterated that promise, and now Jacob is here. And God says to Jacob, I'm with you, and you're going to be good. You're going to go to Egypt, and you will see your son Joseph again. So it's just a really cool spot that God interacts with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all in this one area. So it's just a very special place in the whole story of this family, which is why I wanted to call it out. In Genesis 46, if you read, we're not going to read it, but in verses 8 through 27, this is a full list of all the people from Jacob's family that made it down into Israel, and into Egypt. And if you count Joseph, his wife, and remember they had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. If you count those 4 people in addition to the 66 who came with Jacob, we get 70 people. 70 people, 70 Israelites go into Egypt. Now that's a pretty interesting number because when you look at the end of, or not the end, but kind of the middle or so of Exodus, when the Israelites leave Egypt, it says the count of them was 600,000 men. Doesn't include the women and children. So we're very easily talking a group of people in the millions at this point. 70 entered Egypt. And it was 430 years later when the Exodus happened that millions leave. So when God says, I will make you a great nation, you won't even be able to count the descendants. This is just 430 years later, and we're already in the millions. Like, God checks that box. He kept that promise very, very easily. It's just an interesting numbers game to see that only 70 of them made it in. All right, so Genesis 46, 28 through 30. I do want to read these verses. Someone read that for us.
He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck in a good while. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive.
22 years. That's how long it's been since Jacob has seen his son Joseph. And 22 years that Jacob had thought his son was dead. And now there's this moment. Jacob and Joseph are finally reunited. And when they see each other, I mean, all they can do is cry and hug. Have you ever had a reunion with somebody that you haven't seen in a really long time? Like, just how good it feels. I travel sometimes for work. I might be gone 3 to 5 days at a time at the most. And like, after those 3 to 5 days when I get home, I just want to see my wife and my kids. I can't imagine 22 years. Again, also 22 years just assuming or believing that your son is dead. And now you see him there, but you also see him in all his glory, so to say. You see what he's become as an incredible man and an incredible leader of a nation. Like, just, again, I want us to continue to put ourselves in the shoes of these people in this story and just think, how does this have to feel? Joseph maybe thought he would never see his dad again. Jacob, again, assumed his son is dead, and here they are reuniting, and all they can do is cry and hug each other. Jacob himself even says, this is enough. I can die now. This is all that I needed, just to see that you are still alive, and I'm good. This was it.
And it's kind of different than what we think of. We usually think of marriage and kids, 20, 18, 25. But Jacob was a late starter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these kids, he's at what, 40 or something like that when he gets married in the first place?
Yeah, so yeah.
So, then you've got 22 years at it, and he's like the last kid out of all the others. So, exactly how old he is when Jacob, when Joseph comes along, he's going to be up there in age.
He's older, for sure. Yeah, and you're right. Jacob did get a late start, and then even to think that Joseph was born when Jacob was already older. We read that already back in Genesis 37 when the whole story of Joseph started, that he was the father or the son of his old age. We don't know exactly the number given that verse, but yeah, it's just a sweet, sweet reunion. And so the end of 46, like Joseph's going to go ahead and kind of like prep the way and talk with Pharaoh. Genesis 47, verses 1 through 26. This is you should go read this stuff if you're not reading it on your own, but just to skip through it because it's not supporting the main story that we want to talk about today. Joseph actually takes 5 of his brothers and his father before Pharaoh and introduces them. And Pharaoh's like, well, what do you do? And the brothers like, we're shepherds. And Pharaoh says, great, you're now in charge of my flocks too. So this is how much trust that Pharaoh has in Joseph, that he meets these brothers and spot on says, great, you're shepherds. I imagine you're just as good as your brother is. You're now in charge of all of my flocks as well. I love the trust that Pharaoh has there. They settle in the land of Goshen, which is a little north of like Egypt proper. It's kind of in that Nile Delta riverbed area. So the land there was still very fertile. Even though this famine was going on, there was still plenty of green for the animals and the livestock to live. So that's where the people of Israel ended up settling. The famine continues. If you read through Genesis 47, what was happening, remember, is the Egyptians and all the surrounding area people were coming to Joseph and saying, okay, we're going to buy grain, we're going to buy grain, we're going to buy grain. And after a couple of years of that, people were like, hey, we don't have any money left, but we still need to eat. And so Joseph says, fine, sell me your animals. And so the people are like, well, okay, fine. So they start selling or trading their animals for grain. Well, that happens for a year or so. The people come back and they're like, okay, we have nothing. We have no money. We have no animals. All that we have left is our land. And so Joseph says, well, fine, trade me your land and I'll give you grain. That happens for a little bit. And then the people come back and they're like, we have no money. We have no animals. We have no land. All we have are ourselves. And Joseph says, well, then fine, be the slaves of Egyptians. And it's through this famine and this infrastructure that Joseph sets up that Egypt becomes the most wealthy nation on the earth at the time. This is all set up by this plan, which again, when you get to Exodus, it's really fascinating to see after the plagues, all the Egyptians are like, Israelites, take everything. Here's our money, here's our animals, here's our clothing, here's our gold, here's all of our fine goods. Take everything and leave us. Get out of here. And that's what gave the Israelites such great wealth as they left Egypt, so they could then go build the tabernacle and eventually build the temple. Like, you see this incredible big story that God has set up through all of this. It's so remarkable to see it all come together. Yeah.
So they wouldn't intermingle, and they would still be Israel when they left this nation.
Yep. It's incredible. I do want to read something in Genesis 47, starting in verse 27. So read 27 through 31 for us, please. I told you we're going to kind of hop around here. All right, Jacob knows he's about to die. But the numbers in the Bible are just so interesting. Please never, ever read the Bible and just skip over a number and not think about what it could mean. What is interesting about the number 17 in this story? Yeah. So Joseph is born and lives the first 17 years of his life with his father. Okay? Joseph's mom died while giving birth to Benjamin. Joseph was maybe 1 to 2 when that happened. So Joseph was basically grew up without a mother, with Joseph or Jacob as his father. Joseph is sold into slavery. He spends all this time in Egypt. Jacob and his family now come to Egypt. Jacob lives in Egypt with Joseph now for 17 years. Just what a cool mirroring of time, right? God gave them the first 17 years of their lives together, and now the last 17 years of their lives together. It's a really, really cool story to see how that happens. Genesis 48 and 49, Jacob knows he's dying, and as is the tradition, or as was the tradition in that time, the patriarch of the family would give a blessing. We've seen this, right? We remember the very first day of this study, we went back and looked at Abraham, the story of Abraham, the story of Isaac, and how we got to Jacob and how we got to Joseph. And there's the story of the birthright and the story of the blessings, and there was a lot of cheating and scandal and everything going on back then. This is a very normal thing in the society for the father to say, I'm going to give my blessing. It's basically, I'm going to give you your inheritance now. And so that's happening in Genesis 48 and 49. The first thing that happens is Jacob actually blesses Joseph's 2 children. And he in a sense, adopts them. He says, they're now mine. And so what that does is it makes them a part of remember Joseph was one of how many brothers total? 12? There was the 10, and then Joseph and Benjamin from Rachel, the favorite wife. And so what Jacob does here is says like, okay, Joseph, I'm going to like kind of take you out of the picture for a minute, and I'm going to put your 2 children in now. So now there's like a series of 13, and Jacob starts to extend his blessings to these people, starting with Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph's 2 children. He actually blesses the younger son over the older son. And Joseph is like, no, Dad, you've got it wrong. His eyes he couldn't see really well. He's putting his hands on their heads. And Jacob says, I know what I'm doing. I'm blessing the younger. The younger will be more great and more prosperous than the older, which is really interesting when you go back to the whole story of how Jacob and Esau and that birthright happened, and how Jacob swindled Esau out of it. Jacob was the younger, Esau was the older. So it's just an interesting, again, kind of mirroring of that story. But then we get to 49, and Jacob is now going to bless his grown sons. There's some interesting stuff in here as well. In Genesis 49, verses 3 and 4, Jacob gives his blessing, air quotes, blessing here to Reuben. He says, you're my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. But then in verse 4, he says, you're as unstable as water. You shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. At one point, we talked about this a few weeks ago, Reuben actually slept with one of Jacob's wives. Wasn't his mother, but it was one of Jacob's other wives. Clearly, Jacob has never let go of that, because he's bringing it up here. Simeon and Levi, in verses 5 through 7, if you remember, Jacob had a daughter named Dinah, however you say it. She was actually raped by some men in a town, and so Simeon and Levi went and killed everybody. Caused a whole bunch of stress to Jacob. And so Jacob's like, you're cruel. You slaughtered people. You're not going to get too much of a blessing either. Judah, verses 8 through 12. What is Judah special for in this story?
He's the one that stepped in.
Judah spoke up. At the beginning, when the brothers wanted to kill Joseph, he said, no, let's just sell him as a slave. And then Judah is the one who spoke up to Joseph and said, we've done this great wrong. And that's what led to Joseph revealing himself, or revealing his identity. We also know that Judah is where who comes from? Jesus. Jesus comes from the line of Judah. So there's a great blessing in here. The very famous verses in verse 10 where it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him, capital H, him, shall be the obedience of the people. This is a prophecy of Jesus Christ right here in Genesis 49. That's incredible to think thousands and thousands of years before Jesus walks the earth. Here is Jacob proclaiming a Savior coming. And I think that's just beautiful. Joseph gets a blessing in verses 22 through 26, where Jacob says to him, you are a fruitful bow by a well. Your branches run over the well, but archers have shot at you and have hated you, but your bow remained in strength. He's talking about how his brothers sold him and denied him. But yet Joseph overcame and remained strong. And then finally in verse 27, he blesses Benjamin and says, you're a ravenous wolf. You're a mighty warrior. You will never be satisfied. What an interesting set of blessings that we see here that Jacob gives to his children. But if you continue to follow their stories, you see all these things come true. It's just remarkable to see the blessings that Jacob pours out here. Ma'am.
Joseph's children, Jacob's grandchildren, how did they play into the tribes of Israel? Are they just additional tribes and not part of the 12 chosen of Israel, or do they fold in?
They kind of fold in, because throughout the rest of Scripture, it is, I'm not going to say 100% of the time, because I'm sure there's maybe some different ones here and there, but it is most commonly referred to as the 12 tribes of Israel. And it is still, Joseph is still listed as one of the 12, versus Manasseh and Ephraim being listed as like a 13th, right? As I was studying this week, it was really interesting to see like what Jacob was maybe doing. Normally to the oldest son, the firstborn would get a double portion of the inheritance. And even though Joseph wasn't Jacob's firstborn, he was the firstborn of his favorite wife, which Jacob considered then Joseph his firstborn. He was going to get the double portion of the birthright. What it seems that he was doing was saying, Joseph, I'm not going to give that double portion to you. Instead, I'm going to divide that double portion amongst your two sons. That's the kind of narrative that...
Really what he was doing.
Yeah.
He wasn't breaking out a tribe. They didn't become neighboring tribes outside of Israel.
Right.
They, well, if you were to
Folded in, yeah.
They were holding underneath Joseph.
Yeah, it was really more of a... political is the word that's coming to mind, but that's not right. I can't think of the word I want to say. Just again, the birthright thing of like, Joseph, this would normally be yours, but
It wasn't structural at all.
no. And Joseph was even like, hey, Dad, you're doing this wrong. And Jacob's like, no, I'm not. I've got a reason for this. And he even says like this, God is intending it to be this way. It was a very intentional like skipping over Joseph. I mean, Joseph didn't need a blessing at this point. He was second in command of the most powerful country in the world, so he aight.
There's other parts that, couldn't have known. But
Who couldn't have known?
Jacob couldn't have known.
Mm.
Some of the things he says,
Oh, yeah.
there's no way.
It's very prophetic.
The ruler coming, the scepter.
Yeah.
all that, unless God tells him.
Exactly.
He doesn't know that.
Exactly right.
I find it's interesting that you've got stepmoms all over the place. And you've got Leah's kids are blessed in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Judah is one of Leah's kids. And then Rachel's kids is blessed too, because Joseph is Rachel's kids. So you've got all these,
But the other extra wives' kids.
yeah, and they're blessed too with different things. But you've got, these stepmoms had to be part of the growing of Joseph for those 17 years.
Yeah.
So, and we're not so told anything about that, but they're the ones that are left.
If there was television back then, it would be the Real Housewives of Cana. Is what this would be. All right, let's keep rolling. We still got some good ground to cover here. Genesis 49. I want to read the end of the chapter. So starting in 29, read through 33, please. This is where Jacob actually dies.
Then he gave them Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered by my people. Bury me with my father in a cave in the field on Ephron and Heidi. The cave in the field is
Machpelah. How about that?
Machpelah, near Mamre, in Canaan, which Abraham brought as a burial place from Ephron to Heidi. Along with the field, I get this right next to it. There Abram and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave, and were brought from Isaac.
One more verse.
When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew up his feet into his bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his feet.
All right, so Jacob officially dies. Again, gives instructions for his burial. He wants to be buried with his ancestors, where Abraham and Sarah are, where Isaac and Rebekah are. It mentions here that he buried Leah there, but it doesn't say anything about burying Rachel there. That's just interesting to me. Did Jacob at some point finally feel bad for how he treated Leah and say, okay, fine, I'll put you in the good cave? I don't know. There's something interesting about this. I don't have the answer. It just stands out.
Did Rachel die along their travels when they buried her
Oh, yeah, so wherever they were. Oh, that's right. Yeah, she was buried somewhere more, thank you. I had completely forgotten about that.
Now, we kind of assume the other two women are still alive. We don't know.
We don't know.
It doesn't say they're dead.
Right. I also love, he put his feet into his bed, he breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. There's something beautiful there as well. Even here in Genesis 49, before we get to Christ, before we get to eternal life and resurrection, we have this, he was gathered to his people. Like, there's, death here is not the end. And it just kind of like pokes its head up a little bit right here, this idea of eternity, and that we will be with believers forever. He's gathered to his people. I love that. I love that phrase so much. Genesis 50, last chapter of the book. Here's where things just really start to be, I think, become a bit of a tearjerker. Somebody read the first 14 verses of Genesis 50 for us.
Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded the servants and physicians to involve his father. So the physicians involved Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are involved. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, Now I have found favor in your eyes. Please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am dying in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen. And there he went up with them both chariots and horsemen, and it was a great gathering. And they came to the threshing floor of Atah, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there for the great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of his mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land of Canaanites saw the mourning and the threshing floor of Atah, they said, This is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. There is the name that's called Abez Marina, which is beyond the Jordan.
To 14, please. Through 14.
So his sons did for him just as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and they buried him in the cave of the field of Macro field before the Mamre, which Abraham bought in the field from Ephron and Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father Joseph, returned to Egypt, he and his brothers all went up with him to bury his father.
All right, you and Mike both get 10 points for reading all those crazy names. Man, what a funeral. This is incredible. This is, again, the influence that Joseph has in the land of Egypt. Joseph's father dies. Joseph goes to Pharaoh and is like, hey, I want to give him the burial he asked for. And Pharaoh's like, great, you do that. I'm going to throw in 100x that. And so all these elders, all of these leaders from Pharaoh's house, all the leaders from the land of Egypt, like this is an incredible procession that goes out of Egypt, back up into Canaan, right across the Jordan, so that they can bury Jacob. This is also like, if you think about the irony of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and it took them 40 years to get to the promised land, like it's right there. It's just right there.
It's also kind of interesting that they mourned 70 days. The Egyptians mourned 70 days.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think that's almost the most powerful part.
it's the Egyptians.
Not just that Pharaoh said stuff. I mean, Pharaoh's got stuff to say. Like,
And we got so much history that we see of all this stuff because one of the things about the pyramids
Yeah.
And so, one of these pharaohs that's talked about here, you go look at the pyramids and say, yeah,
It-
Also, there's the number 70 again.
Yeah, 70 is another important number. We had 70 Israelites come into Egypt, and here they're mourning for him for 70 days. It's just, again, just an incredibly beautiful scene or picture of the love that this family had for their patriarch, but also the influence that Joseph had over the king of Egypt. That the king's like, yeah, take 70 days off and take a couple hundred, maybe even 1,000 of my people with you so that you can do this the right way. It's awesome. Vicky.
I think it was very interesting that God exalts and the evil exalt. And the Egyptians had all the wealth and all the power, but the honor was given to Jacob, the Israelite.
Vicky said, God will honor whom he will honor. He will bring down who he will bring down. And so even though the Egyptians are the ones who had all the wealth and the power, all the honor in this case was given to Jacob. He wasn't poor. We know he was a wealthy man as well. But yeah, I love the picture of this burial.
And to further that too, like the Egyptians would even eat living people.
Yeah,
Like just to continue the perspective there, like that's,
yeah,
how it is.
it's awesome. Okay, so Jacob's gone. All that's left now are the brothers. Let's see what happens. Verses 15 through 18. Don't go any farther.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Oh, you said,
I'm sorry, I did say 18. I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes, please read 18. Read 18. I'm sorry.
his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." Full stop.
Thank you. Sorry. So much happens in so few verses here. I didn't want to give it away. Oh, this just breaks Joseph's heart. It breaks his heart. Dad's gone. The other brothers are now going, oh man, now we're going to get it. Joseph was only being nice to us while Dad was still alive because he didn't want Dad to see him getting upset at us. Like, now we're in for it. The time of reckoning is here. They're terrified. And it breaks Joseph's heart because they send a messenger to him. We don't know 100% for sure, but I'm going to go ahead and say like 99% sure the way this is written here, this was a fabricated message from Dad, not a real thing that Dad told them to do.
That's how it plays.
Yeah. We never see Jacob or hear Jacob telling the other sons, hey, you should do this. So that's why I'm like leaving that 1% there. But I'm 99% sure these guys are just concocting up this plan because they're terrified.
Jacob would have actually said to Joseph, you need to forgive your brothers.
Okay, yeah. They had time. They had the 17 years, right? And so the brothers send this message to Joseph. Hey, before Dad died, he said, make sure you forgive your brothers. And then they then go before Joseph and they fall down at his face and they say, we're your servants. And Joseph he just weeps. He just weeps. Why is he so upset? Gina said because they're stupid.
Well, it appears as though he had convinced himself that they had fully gotten it, that they had gotten the change, that they had gotten the shift.
Okay.
And now all of a sudden he realizes, oh my goodness, it didn't understand. They've been forgiven all along. And that's got to be gut-wrenching when 17 years later, oh, it all hinged on Dad? Wait, I thought you got my character.
Yeah.
You didn't.
Yeah, we talked last week. Oh, sorry, one thing. I just want to build on that. We talked last week about these 3 tests that Joseph put his brothers through because he wanted to make sure they had changed. And it appeared they had changed, and now it seems like maybe that wasn't complete yet, is what Catherine's saying. Faye.
What I was going to say,
Oh.
their character.
Okay.
He tested them, and maybe it was a ruse for them to get through the famine and everything, and now it's kind of like,
Hmm.
you know, and they're going back, but you don't know what the private conversations were, like, who's the gang leader of this bunch? You know? Well, but it's both of their character, it's not just, it's both of their character, from Joseph's perspective, it's, they didn't get me.
Mm-hmm.
And from their perspective, it's, I don't know that he really truly has forgiven us the way he pretends he has.
Also,
It's both.
probably realizes that they're lying.
Yeah.
They lied before, they're lying again.
Yeah. I think the underlying thing going on here is that Joseph has 100% forgiven his brothers, but his brothers have not 100% accepted that forgiveness. And I look at this and I see an incredible picture of our own relationship with God. Because God 100% forgives us. The Bible talks about he separates us from our sin as far as the east is from the west. Just an incredible word picture of like, how far away are the east and the west? They are infinitely far away from one another. God has blotted out our transgressions, forgiven our sins, to remember them no more. And that's what Joseph has done to his brothers as a model of what God does to us. And here the brothers are coming before him saying, we still carry this guilt. We still don't think we're forgiven. And Joseph just weeps. He's like, guys, you still don't get it. And I see our relationship with God. How much of our own sin and our past do we still carry with us? How much of that guilt do we carry? And God's like, I want you to be free from that. And we still keep bringing it back up.
The other thing is, how do we truly forgive others?
Okay?
That's
That side of the coin's valid too. Do we forgive all the way?
It's not just the forgiveness either, it's just how great affection, that Joseph had for his brothers. And do we fully get the affection that Christ has for us? I learn that every day more and more and more.
Isn't it crazy? It's just, it's unbelievable. And this is just such a great example and such a beautiful picture of the absolute forgiveness that God shows to us. And yet we still just hold on to this mess that's in our lives. And God's like, no, just open the fist. Let that stuff out. Joseph has fully forgiven his brothers. These tears, I think, are just absolute tears of sadness. I do also see in here, the brothers approach him, and it says they fell down before his face. So once again, the dream is coming true. His brothers are bowing down before him. This has happened multiple times now. It still continues to happen. They offer themselves to be Joseph's slaves. They figure at this point, it's either we confess or we lay ourselves down and commit to being slaves, or he's taken our heads. Let's just go ahead and be slaves. That's better than death. It seems as like this is maybe their logic in their minds. All right, but now let's read and see what Joseph does, verses 19 through 21.
Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
Man, this reinforcement of Joseph's forgiveness, how real and how true and how complete his forgiveness was and has always been for his brothers. God turned these incredible lemons into lemonade throughout this entire story. And in this again, I think remarkable display of forgiveness and affection. We just see Joseph as a picture of God and the forgiveness that he offers us. Romans 8:28, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. This entire story is validation of that verse.
I've often wondered if Paul was thinking about his own life or he was reflecting back to this when he wrote that.
Or a little bit of both. A little bit of both. I mean, Paul clearly would have known the entire story of Joseph. Paul was well studied in the Old Testament.
You know, the two it says in your little ones, all throughout the Old Testament, we see one generation's sin affecting another generation, affecting another one,
Mhm.
and grudges and the things that continue to be held here. And I don't guess I've ever read it in that way, it just popped up while reading it now. And Joseph is almost trying to stop that. Like, this ends with us. Don't let your children carry it on.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that speaks like with familial things, like if, you know, our parents' generation had issues and then their parents' generation had issues. Are we just carrying that because of the stories we've been told, you know, that we're angry at somebody else and then it continues because of what we've heard and not the way Joseph forgave us? It's free and clear.
Yeah.
That part's going to be told to their generation, or is that part of what continues as the move on?
There's also a few times throughout Scripture, I don't have any of the exact verses in front of me, where God says, like, I will bless you to generations for those who follow me, but then you will also, those who don't follow me will be punished for generations. And we see a little bit of that picture here as well, of Joseph saying, I'm not just going to take care of you, I'm also going to take care of your families and your families and your families. So yeah, it's another picture of just how complete and true and real Joseph's forgiveness was for his brothers.
We've got this, you know, in our world, we don't see these two countries the same necessarily, but we have them staying in Egypt for the last part of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, all the other folks are carried back to be buried in what is now Israel. But in this case, he is buried in Egypt.
Hang tight. No, you're going ahead, Harry. Stop that. Stop that. Vicky, give him a little elbow.
I just find it really, it's like a curveball.
The second half of 21 is, as I think, for me personally, it's my favorite. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them, because we are so, I think about myself in the shoes of the brothers, which
Mhm.
I have been so many numerous times, you can't count them in your own life, where you're bringing back up the sins that have been removed from the east to the west.
Yeah.
And God goes, it's okay. I got you. Like, that speaking comfort and kindness, and I mean, that's a kind of patience and that's a kind of love that does not resonate with human beings.
Yeah.
Readily.
Yeah.
And it's easy to put yourself in the brother's shoes here and not as much Joseph's shoes. So the second half of that verse for me is the most powerful of all that. Like,
Yeah.
Period. Because I know what it's like to be the brothers.
It's a remarkable moment.
Yeah.
Just what a moment. And I love the phrase too. It's again a very popular verse in the Bible. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And I want us to harp on that phrase for a minute, because just even like zoom out and look at the timeline of your own life. God has a plan. Imagine there's like a straight line being drawn. This is God's plan for the universe. And that plan is going, because God is supreme. God is sovereign. God is on the throne. His plan will achieve. But right along that other line, right along his plan, starting with the sin in the Garden of Eden, there's this other line of evil that's running along. And so we have to look at our lives. I was talking with my parents about this a few weeks ago when I was just telling them about the series and everything. And My mom had said that she heard it described once as almost like a train track. One rail of the train track is God's plan. The other rail of the train track is all the evil in the world. And they're going side by side. But ultimately, God's plan is going to overtake the evil. And sometimes this evil in our lives, we don't have control over it. Many times we don't have the control over it. But God's plan is still happening. God's plan cannot and will not be stopped. And again, this is an incredible picture that we can look at that and be reassured and say, yeah, I might be in the pit right now. I might be in the prison right now. I might be in the palace right now, depending on where Joseph was in his life. But God's plan is running the entire time. Joseph's age, I want us to zoom out and look at this for a minute. Joseph was about 15 when his younger brother Benjamin was born, his true full brother, and his mom died. Okay, he's 15 there. 17, he's sold as a slave, ends up serving Potiphar for a while. We don't know the exact amount of time. Ends up being thrown in jail for a while. Again, we don't know the exact amount of time, but that era of his life starts at 17. 28 years old, he interprets the dream of the butler and the baker in prison. 30 years old, he stands before Pharaoh and gets the promotion. 37, the 7 years of plenty end. Sometime in there, he had his 2 sons and also got married. 39 years old, he reveals himself to his brothers, and his father and everyone move into Egypt. He would have been 44 when the famine ended. He was 56 when his dad died. After his dad died, we find out in a minute, Joseph lives to be 110. So if you really zoom out and look at all of this, from the age of 17 to 30 was this 13-year period of turmoil. And then he gets the rest of his life, just about the rest of his life, with his family and in this great state of power over Egypt. The terrible part of his life was actually kind of short compared to the goodness of his life. And I think that's a really cool perspective for us to look back on and see, because, again, a lot of times when we're in the pit or when we're in the prison, we just think it's so long and it's never going to end. But if we, again, zoom out and look into our own lives, is it really the majority of our lives that we're in the pit or the prison? Or is it maybe a smaller chunk? Yeah.
What are your thoughts? And about a concept
Mm-hmm.
that 13 years in the totality of the picture is a very short period of time. And not to be the negative Nelly, but what are your thoughts on how people age then? Because I can tell you, from 50 to 110, the quality of life is different from like 0 to 50. So how do you think they aged back then? Did they age as rapidly as we do now? Do you think that their quality of life was greater, the same?
The aging question is an interesting one, because if you look before the flood, people lived to be 900 and some years old, which, no thank you. That's just a lot.
But no, years of living like, I mean, if you took 500 of those years and you lived like you were 18, that's not a bad deal.
But after the flood, you start to see the lifespan of people dramatically drop off. Jacob lived to be, I think he says, somewhere back in 49, he lived to be like 136 or so. And he even said, when he's talking to Pharaoh, my journeying on this earth was nothing compared to my forefathers. So that age is like quickly dropping down to what we see today, where the average lifespan is somewhere in the 80 to 100 year range. So I don't know, like, I've never thought of it through the lens of like, do they age more quickly? Was like Methuselah like at 800 years old and still like, yeah, I can knock out 100 push-ups? I don't know. Like, I don't know what state he would have been in. It's a really interesting way to think about it. I don't know.
If you look at a lot of the people in there, they were having kids in their 70s.
Yeah,
That says something to the quality of life.
that's fair.
Where was that God said that he limited man's age to 120?
After the flood. It was right after the flood. Yeah, that's when God instituted seasons. That's when life was cut down to the 80 to 100 years range. A lot of things, the flood did a lot. The flood was like, you got major milestones of the universe: creation, the flood, the cross, the second coming. I mean, like, those are some of the biggest milestones you just look at in human history. I want to wrap this up. In verse 22, Joseph dies, or 22 through the end. Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land, out of Egypt, and to the land which he had sworn to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, Canaan, the land that you all just came down here from. He's going to give it back to you." Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will visit you. You will carry my bones out of here." Joseph died, 110 years old. They embalmed him, which means they made him a mummy. I think that's kind of cool. And he was put in a coffin in Egypt. There's the end of it. Joseph even says, "I'm dying here, but just like my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, this will not be my final resting place. Take my bones out." And when we see the children of Israel leaving Egypt 430 years later, they carried Joseph's bones. Gross. But they made true on the promise. Okay, we gotta wrap this up. There's a couple of headlines here that I want us to walk away from this entire story with. Headline number 1. There's actually 6. If you want to write these down, get your pen out and get quick.
Send out your notes for this.
I can do it. Yeah, I can send them out. God's plan is always bigger than our circumstances. We can see that so clear in Joseph's life here. Even when things seem very dire, we know that God is working behind the scenes, and there is a much greater purpose at play. Trusting God has a bigger plan, what can help us maintain our faith in very difficult times. We saw Joseph never lost his faith. Joseph, in the back of his mind, I truly believe, realized all of this was happening under God's control for a purpose. And we even see him verbally say that to his brothers. "You meant this for evil. God meant it for good." So we got to keep that perspective that God's plan is always bigger than whatever circumstances we're in the middle of. Number 2, forgiveness. And not only forgiveness, but forgiveness and reconciliation are incredibly powerful. The importance of forgiveness cannot be understated from this story. Even when we've been hurt so deeply by the people who love us, or even maybe people who don't love us. But that forgiveness brings that healing to that relationship, and it allows that reconciliation to happen. And that's important for us in our earthly relationships, as well as it is for how God treats us in our spiritual relationship with him. Number 3, integrity matters. Man, Joseph had so many times to throw in the towel. You ever heard the phrase that integrity is who you are when no one's looking? Joseph's integrity is remarkable through this story. And it paid well for him. It paid off very, very well. Despite all the betrayal and the false accusations, all these things again that were stacked against Joseph, he maintained his innocence, he maintained his integrity, he maintained his faithfulness through the Lord, even when no one was watching. And then when people were watching, look at what it led him to. It led him to being second command in all of Egypt. He never compromised his values. He remained faithful to God in every circumstance. His integrity was greatly rewarded. Now I can't stand up here and guarantee you that your integrity would be rewarded, but we can look at Joseph's life as an example and say, man, even if I don't get that reward until eternity, I want that integrity. I want to feel good that even when no one's looking, I'm making the right choice and I'm keeping my faithfulness. Number 4, the importance of patience and endurance. I don't want to skip over the fact that it was 13 years that Joseph was in the pit and in the prison. Because 13 years is a long time. That is a very, very long amount of time. I mean, over a decade. But it's again the perspective. Our timing is not always God's timing. God has something at work. I don't know what it is. Patience through tough times. is what God is asking us for. That's even mentioned in James chapter 5. James talks a lot about being patient and going through trials and persevering through the trials because it strengthens our faith. That's a lot of what James's letter is about.
What is patience also known as? Long-suffering.
Yeah, the other word. I was going to say virtue, but long suffering, yeah, not short suffering. That's not patience. Long suffering. Number 5, God can use our pain for his glory. Man, even when we're going through it, even when we're suffering in our lives, there is still something good that can come out of it and an example that we can be to other people of remaining faithful through the pain. I keep saying it, through the pit, through the prison, that others can look at us and see God's glory through it. The last headline I have is one that I've mentioned a few times through the past few weeks. Everyone who encounters us should encounter God in some way. That was so true and so consistent in Joseph's story that Potiphar saw that everything Joseph did, God was with him. The jailer said, everything this guy does, I can tell that God is with him. Pharaoh says, no one can have this wisdom unless God is with him. It's just, again, it's remarkable to see this influence that Joseph had spiritually over this nation of Israel when they were nothing but pagan God worshipers. Joseph is a bright light in this place and giving everyone a chance who encounters him to have an encounter with God Almighty. What is our influence like? Is our influence as strong as Joseph's was in the entire nation of Israel? Can we say that we can shine bright like he did? So those were like 6 kind of, again, headlines that I'm really pulling out of this entire story. If you look back at Genesis 37 through 50, there's so much we can learn, but these almost seem like 6 themes that really kind of emerged. What else would you say? What would you add to that list? What are some other themes that have emerged through the story? But God. Yeah, but God, ... Yeah.
No one in Scripture more like Jesus Christ than Joseph. The things that they went through and dealt with, it's just remarkable. And how a lot of us can identify with the story of Joseph because he's taken us from the pit to the palace.
Yeah. You know another parallel that really I had never thought of, but it smacked me across the face this week as I was studying and preparing? Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh and began his leadership. Jesus was 30 when he began his public ministry. It was just another parallel of like, man, why have I never caught that before? It's wild. Just wild. Ma'am. Vicky said, nothing will happen to you today that we can't handle together. Yeah. I'm sure many of you have seen like Footprints poem, like the footprints in the sand, and they went from 2 sets to 1 set. And it wasn't that God left us, it's that God was carrying us, like that whole kind of story. I think we get a very clear picture of that. Like God's like, we can handle this together. And sometimes I might just have to carry you through it. You won't be able to walk on your own, but I'll get you there.
I think of the importance of forgiveness versus the other function. Because so much of what we see in the world is trying to get back, trying to present one group against another, trying to divide division. Forgiveness is the total opposite.
Forgiveness is an incredible weapon. To be used for good, of course. But yeah, powerful, powerful weapon.
It's a strength, not a weakness.
Absolutely, yeah. Cliff, were you raising your hand? Just flexing your guns?
In the faithfulness, Joseph never lost his faith.
Yeah.
Through all he went
Yeah. Faithfulness, like just steady as a rock.
And how different things would have turned out if he hadn't been.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, the story ends in lemonade, but it could have remained in lemons if he would have lost his faithfulness. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that. Even though Joseph had this incredible power and endless wealth, he never held it over people's heads. He never gloated. He looked at it as, okay, God has given me this to be a steward over. How do I use this to help other people? That's incredible humility to be able to recognize that. That's great. So many lessons. Like we could start this entire study over and do another 5 to 6 weeks of it and probably have another 10 headlines that we could pull out of it. It's just such a remarkable story to see what happened to this guy's life and how he used it and how God used it for the good. The pit, the prison, the palace. What a progression. Now you got your hand up. Yeah. Yeah, and to think it all happens in 13 chapters too. Like, so the next time you're kind of feeling the funk, right? And you're just like, I need some inspiration, I need some encouragement, I need some strength from the word. Like 13 chapters. I mean, you could knock that out in 30 minutes and just think of the strength that it could offer you. 13 chapters, 13 years. See, never skip the numbers in the Bible, y'all. Maybe the book of Numbers. That's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of numbers. All right, somebody wrap us up so we can head over. It's 10:45. We got a boogity woogity. Thank you again for just all the awesome discussion. This was a really great journey through this story. So thanks for coming along.
Dear Lord, thank you for this time we've had together to get into your word and learn more about you through it. Thank you for the fellowship we've had as we've discussed your word, and please help us to share your word, or else we can bring us back together. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Stacy. Next week, Rhett is going to start a series leading up to Easter.
Do we have Sunday school next week, means it's Family Sunday?
Oh, we are planning on it. I think you're right, Chip. Whoops! I won't be here next week because I'll be on spring break, but I'll get with Rhett and we'll figure it out.
Have you heard of the imaging they've done underneath the pyramids?
No.
Up under the pyramids, it goes almost 2,000 feet underground.
Oh my goodness!
So it's like taller than the tallest buildings we have
Wow,
on the ground.
it's a big hole.
But that was before the floods. All that was actually built. Like their technology in ways was more advanced than what we've even got now.
I've wondered
that's
that.
why God wiped it out. Really.
Yeah, I've wondered that before. It's like, man, like what did they have
They
that
had like
we don't?
real wicked technology. They probably
Yeah.
were opening the portals to the demonic world realm and
Ah.
everything else too.
I don't know about all